An elegant and self-assured woman of color stepped gracefully into the high-tech conference room. A cadre of older male executives sat at the polished obsidian table, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and condescension. All eyes, however, quickly darted to the man at the head of the table, Julian Croft, the notoriously domineering and conceited CEO of Apex Dynamics. Elara had spent the better part of a decade navigating rooms just like this one, where every glance was a clear message. She didn't fit in. Yet, with the profound serenity of someone who had faced down countless underestimations, she moved towards Croft with unhesitating confidence. "Good afternoon, Mr. Croft," Elara said, her voice a blend of softness and authority, projecting unshakable self-possession. She extended her hand in the traditional gesture of professional courtesy. Julian Croft glanced down at her offered hand with chilly disinterest, a disdainful smirk playing on his lips. Without a second thought, he crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and stated icily, "I don't shake hands with junior staff." A sudden quiet descended upon the room, as if the very air had chilled. A few of the executives shifted uncomfortably, though they quickly composed their features, while others grinned openly in approval, their disdain palpable. Elara didn't even blink. She smoothly withdrew her hand, her expression remaining perfectly neutral. Her deep, unwavering gaze stayed fixed on Julian's, not with anger or embarrassment, but with a composed self-assurance, as if this was far from her first encounter with such dismissiveness. "I'm not your junior staff, Mr. Croft," she responded quietly, her tone even yet filled with a powerful undertone. Julian let out a short, harsh laugh, turning to the board for validation. "Oh? And what position do you hold here at our company?" he sneered. The men seated around him chuckled, their laughter laced with mockery. Still, Elara remained composed. She deliberately opened the minimalist data slate she always carried, her movements precise and unhurried. "I'm here to finalize our firm's $5 billion investment in Apex Dynamics," Elara announced, each word cutting through the derisive atmosphere like a laser. A heavy silence swept through the room. The contemptuous smile melted from Julian Croft's face, replaced by a look of wide-eyed disbelief and dawning apprehension. The other executives exchanged puzzled glances, seemingly unable to comprehend what they had just heard. In Croft's mind, a frantic thought flashed. $5 billion. Impossible. How could this woman wield such authority? He quickly brushed off the thought as a misunderstanding or an elaborate bluff. Attempting to recapture his usual arrogance, he straightened his posture and sneered to cover his unease. "A $5 billion investment? Are you serious? No one in their right mind would give that kind of power to someone like you." The board erupted in another round of uneasy laughter, though this time it sounded hollow and forced. Elara remained silent. Her expression had shifted to the cool detachment of a seasoned investor, calmly assessing the scene. Without another word, she closed her portfolio, leaned back in her chair, and observed Julian and his team. She recognized that this moment was more than a personal affront. It was clear evidence of the ingrained prejudice and hubris within the very company she was evaluating. Croft, regaining a sliver of his bravado, continued with a mocking air. "Well then, let's get on with the meeting. I'm very interested to see what you have for us." Elara nodded without speaking, her gaze shifting to the panoramic window that displayed the sprawling, futuristic city below. Internally, she silently decided to reevaluate the investment. But for now, she would observe a little longer. Julian Croft and Apex Dynamics had no idea of the storm their arrogance had just unleashed. They had no idea that in a matter of hours, their careers and reputations would be hanging by a thread, held by the very woman they had just dismissed. A quiet but decisive battle was about to begin, and Elara Vance would be the one in complete control. Elara's gaze slowly moved away from the expansive window, where the city of Neo-Viridia pulsed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the walls of Apex Dynamics. A strange tension now filled the conference room, even as Julian Croft continued his bombastic presentation of the company's achievements. Elara subtly adjusted the collar of her jacket, a movement so slight it was almost imperceptible, yet it was the clearest sign of her unshakable calm and control. In reality, Elara Vance was no stranger to discrimination, or scenes like the one she had just experienced. Beneath her unassuming exterior was the CEO of Vance Capital, a formidable investment firm managing assets north of $60 billion. Her position was the envy of countless finance professionals and the prize every major corporation coveted. A simple nod or shake of her head could move markets and destabilize even the most powerful companies. Yet, she had chosen to appear unassuming at Apex Dynamics, not out of fear of judgment, but as a deliberate strategy. She consciously dressed in a minimalist style and avoided any overt displays of wealth. No autonomous luxury vehicle, no dazzling bioluminescent jewelry, because Elara believed that in moments that seemed trivial, an organization's true character was revealed. Flashback to an hour earlier. Elara had entered the grand, holographic-adorned lobby of Apex Dynamics' headquarters. She observed everything: the sleek, modern decor, the way the staff interacted with clients, and most importantly, their attitude toward anyone they considered unimportant. From the moment she approached the reception desk, Chloe's skeptical gaze told her everything she needed to know. The young receptionist offered a forced, perfunctory smile, her eyes scanning Elara from head to toe, as if trying to determine if this plainly dressed woman of color had wandered in by mistake. "I'm here for a meeting with Mr. Julian Croft," Elara had stated calmly, her confident tone one that should have commanded immediate professional attention. Chloe, however, barely hid her doubt. "You're here for the junior analyst interview, right?" she asked, as if it were inconceivable that someone like Elara could have a direct appointment with the formidable CEO. "No," Elara replied evenly. "I have a meeting scheduled with Mr. Croft at 10 a.m. My name is Elara Vance." Reluctantly, Chloe checked her console. "Right, you can wait over there," she said, gesturing to a cramped, uncomfortable corner far from the plush VIP lounge where two sharply dressed men were enjoying complimentary synth coffee. Elara did not argue. She nodded and took a seat in the hard-backed chair in the corner, fully aware that this snub was not accidental. It was evidence of a corporate culture steeped in prejudice, where people judged worth based on appearance alone. For the next 45 minutes, she watched everything. Chloe's dismissive treatment of other visitors, the interactions among the staff, and the unspoken hierarchy etched into every gesture. Each detail was solid proof of the problems lurking beneath Apex Dynamics' polished exterior. Famous in financial circles for her uncanny ability to read both people and organizations, Elara always sought to understand a company's inner workings, something no financial statement or slick presentation could reveal. Now, seated in the chilly conference room with Julian Croft and his team, she knew that her decision to proceed with the $5 billion investment was no longer just about capital. It had become a contest between genuine value and deep-seated prejudice, between a healthy corporate culture and the toxic arrogance of those who believed power gave them the right to belittle others. A faint smile touched her lips. Long prepared for this moment, Elara knew she was not alone, and this time she would be the one controlling the game entirely. Julian Croft and his allies would soon learn that behind her calm, unassuming facade lay a formidable power, and discovering it would cost them dearly. From that one discreet glance, Elara had anticipated this meeting would not be easy. But what she was experiencing far surpassed her own expectations. After waiting for more than 45 minutes, Julian Croft's personal assistant, a blonde woman named Anya, finally appeared and asked Elara to stand. Anya led her down a long corridor lined with expensive digital art, stopping at a dark, unmarked door that looked nothing like the grand entrance to the executive boardroom. Anya opened the door with a polite but unmistakably cold demeanor. "Please, come in. Mr. Croft will be with you shortly." Elara stepped inside. The room was small and Spartan, hardly what one would expect at a leading tech firm like Apex Dynamics. A small, dark laminate table stood in the center, surrounded by stiff, uncomfortable chairs. There was no holographic projector or presentation screen, only a few thin stacks of printouts, scattered carelessly as if prepared in a hurry. Looking around, Elara immediately recognized that this setup was deliberate. It was a silent message about how the leadership viewed her, as someone they believed was there merely to fulfill a diversity requirement, not to play any meaningful role in Apex Dynamics' future. Moments later, the door swung open and Julian Croft strode in unceremoniously, his eyes glued to his data slate as he walked, offering Elara no acknowledgement. Only after a beat did he look up, his cold gaze sweeping the room before he dropped into a chair with his usual arrogance. "Oh, you're here," Julian drawled, his tone dismissive. "Sorry for the wait. We have some of our diversity obligations to get through." 3 other executives in dark suits followed him in, all looking at Elara as though she were an unwelcome intruder. Elara assessed each man in turn, committing every subtle detail to memory. Julian introduced her curtly and with barely veiled sarcasm. "Gentlemen, this is Ms. Elara Vance, here to assess our diversity initiatives. I'm sure we can get through this quickly." Elara offered a slight smile, her composure unwavering. No one in the room realized that every word and gesture was being meticulously catalogued in her mind as evidence for her upcoming decision. Once the introductions were over, Julian launched into an overly simplified overview of Apex Dynamics products, as if assuming Elara lacked the expertise to understand anything more technical. He even glanced sideways at his colleagues, a contemptuous smirk on his face. The tension in the room grew, but Elara remained unruffled. When Julian finally finished his perfunctory presentation, Elara spoke up, her voice soft but pointed, posing incisive, expert questions. "In your latest quarterly report, I noted that R&D spending decreased by over 15%, yet you claim Apex is accelerating its advanced technology development. Could you clarify that discrepancy?" Julian paused for a moment, then forced a grin and looked around as if seeking help. No one spoke up. He shrugged, trying to sound confident, but clearly flustered. "That's a complex financial matter. Perhaps you're not familiar with how a tech company like Apex allocates its expenses. We often reclassify costs across different departments." Elara pressed on, calm and relentless. "And regarding the AI platform you mentioned, what model are you using to optimize inference speed and minimize latency at scale? I don't see any clear reference to it in your latest technical white papers." Julian's face flushed with embarrassment. To mask his lack of preparation, he turned to a colleague and feigned a laugh, as if Elara's questions were absurd. "Well, on the deep technical side, I'm afraid that's not really on today's agenda. Perhaps our CTO can cover that later if necessary." The other men in the room chuckled awkwardly, their eyes still filled with condescension. Elara, however, showed no sign of annoyance. She knew exactly how to control the situation with her serene silence. In fact, the contempt and arrogance displayed by Julian and Apex's leadership had ceased to be mere slights. They had become irrefutable proof that Apex was hiding critical shortcomings behind its polished image. Elara thought to herself that this was precisely the opportunity she needed to assess the true value of the $5 billion investment she was considering. She closed her portfolio with deliberate calm, sat up straighter, and continued to observe Julian. Despite his dismissive tone and veiled mockery, Elara understood that this meeting was only the opening move in a much longer game, one she had planned down to the smallest detail. And for Elara Vance, every ounce of disrespect and every dismissive remark from Julian Croft and his colleagues would come at a very steep price. The tension in the boardroom persisted, a cold silence enveloping the cramped space. Elara sat motionless, her calm, incisive gaze following every subtle movement of Julian Croft and the other executives around the table. She understood perfectly what was happening. Julian had realized that the woman opposite him could not be easily intimidated, and that realization made him visibly uncomfortable. Julian began to lose his patience, his face flushed, a carefully concealed anger flickering behind his forced smile. He leaned back, cast a furtive glance at his colleagues as if seeking an ally, then turned his gaze back to Elara. His polite facade evaporated. Suddenly he broke into a crooked, arrogant grin and strode to the small beverage station in the corner where a few cups of synth coffee had been set out. Julian picked up a cup, deliberately fixed Elara with a mocking look, and called out with pointed emphasis, "Miss Vance, you must like your coffee really sweet with lots of cream, right? I hear that's what our service staff downstairs prefer." Each word rang out, drawn out to ensure everyone in the room caught the thinly veiled, racist jab. A few directors near Julian exchanged smirks, their eyes alight with approval at the CEO's crude joke. Elara felt each syllable like a sharp blade cutting into her mind. She instantly recognized the intent behind the remark. It wasn't mere teasing, but a deep insult designed to pigeonhole her with heavy stereotypes of race and class. His words reflected not only personal bias, but a deeply rooted toxic culture under his leadership. Yet Elara remained unshaken. Refusing to give Julian the reaction he sought, she inclined her head slightly and replied with measured poise, "Thank you, Mr. Croft, but I take my coffee black, no sugar, much like I prefer to approach issues. Clearly and directly." Her deft retort caught Julian off guard. His face drained of color for a heartbeat before he forced back his self-satisfied grin and leaned over to murmur something to a colleague. Before Elara could fully refocus, the door swung open again. A contingent of other senior Apex executives entered, all clad in expensive suits and exuding overconfidence. The already tight quarters felt even more cramped. Julian immediately turned his attention to them, greeting each with exaggerated warmth as he shook hands. When one newcomer extended his hand toward Elara in courtesy, Julian interjected in a dismissive tone, repeating the same rebuff as before. "Oh no, Mr. Edwards, I don't shake hands with subordinates, and neither should you." His words reverberated through the room, laying bare his contempt for Elara. Some of the new arrivals glanced at one another, feigning surprise, before pretending to focus on other matters. Others simply ignored the disrespect, tacitly condoning it. Elara remained seated, her gaze unwavering and steely, a testament to her poise and restraint. Internally, she felt a profound disappointment. Not in Julian's behavior, which she had anticipated, but in Apex itself. a powerhouse organization allowing someone like Julian Croft to wield unchecked authority. This was no longer a personal slight, but a vivid symbol of injustice and prejudice embedded in the company's culture. Amid that oppressive stillness, Elara thought of the countless individuals who must have endured Julian's public humiliations and discrimination, those who'd stayed silent for fear of losing advancement or even their jobs. Their silence had emboldened his arrogance and his brazen abuses of power. But today, Julian had made a grievous error. He failed to recognize that Elara Vance was unlike anyone he'd ever encountered. She represented not only herself, but the force of a $5 billion investment he desperately needed, yet completely overlooked. Elara reminded herself that true power does not stem from oppressing or belittling others. It comes from respect and fairness. Julian had dug a deep pit for himself with his own bigotry and contempt. Straightening her posture, she fixed Julian with an icy stare. Her silence spoke volumes. Though he had humiliated her publicly, the real battle was only beginning. And Elara Vance would be the one in control. The stifling tension continued to suffuse the cramped boardroom, each passing second stretched into an eternity. Elara fixed Julian with a cold, unwavering stare, not one of anger or bitterness, but of steely resolve, a quietly formidable power emanating from the woman he still dangerously underestimated. The moment Julian publicly refused her handshake again, sneering, "I don't shake hands with subordinates," Elara knew exactly what to do. Her decision was no longer a spur-of-the-moment reaction or personal indignation. It had become a strategic choice, grounded in a wealth of irrefutable evidence of the toxic culture deeply embedded at Apex Dynamics. With discreet precision, Elara slipped her hand into the small satchel by her side, retrieved her phone, and switched it to silent. One word was all she needed to send. Execute. That message to Marcus Thorne, her longtime CFO and most trusted ally, was enough to trigger the plan Vance Capital had meticulously crafted long before today's meeting. Several blocks away, in a sleek office overlooking the Apex Dynamics headquarters, Marcus sat before a large monitor filled with complex financial data streams. When Elara's brief message illuminated his phone screen, he allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. This was not delight, but deep understanding. He and Elara had worked together long enough that he knew the moment she chose the word execute, it signified no mere suggestion, but an absolute command. Without hesitation, Marcus signaled to his team of financial analysts to spring into action. A flurry of carefully calibrated communications ensued, swift, precise, and utterly strategic. Those analysts began feeding subtle but potent signals to leading market AI advisors whose opinions directly influenced Apex's share price. Less than 30 minutes after Elara's instruction, on the world's major stock exchanges, a cascade of mysterious sell orders struck Apex's shares at breakneck speed. Other investors, sensing something awry, quickly joined the exodus. What began as minor fluctuations rapidly escalated into a full-scale sell-off. Back in the small Apex boardroom, Elara showed not a trace of anxiety. She sat serenely, observing Julian and his fellow directors. Julian rambled on arrogantly, wholly oblivious to how instantly his company's financial fate had shifted. Suddenly, the chime of Julian's desk communicator cut through the air, insistent, frantic, and relentless. Anya, his assistant, burst into the room, panic etched on her face. She bent to whisper urgently in his ear. Julian's expression drained of color. He struggled to compose himself, but failed. He sprang from his chair and bolted from the room without explanation. Chaos erupted among the remaining executives. Some stood bewildered, exchanging confused glances. Elara remained unmoved, calmly closing her portfolio and jotting a few concise notes in her datapad, as though she were merely observing an unconnected incident. Down the hall, in his private office, Julian stared at the stock ticker on his screen in disbelief. Apex's shares, his pride and joy, had plummeted catastrophically in under an hour, erasing hundreds of millions in market value almost instantly. "What the hell is happening?" Julian snarled at the assistants clustered around him. Trembling, Anya replied softly, "Sir, it appears someone has spread negative rumors and triggered a sell-off. Wall Street's AI analysts are also flagging concerns about our leadership and corporate culture." Julian recoiled, as if awakened from a long, cherished fantasy. His gaze shifted back toward the small boardroom where Elara still sat composed, and a sharp unease settled in his chest. Meanwhile, Elara allowed herself a discreet smile as her phone chimed again with Marcus's brief update. "Phase 1 complete. Stock is down 8% in 30 minutes. This was more than personal retribution. It was the most powerful warning Julian and his kind could receive. Elara understood that in the ruthless realm of finance, sometimes the clearest message must be delivered in the only language people like Julian truly comprehend: money and markets. He might have dismissed her, mocked her publicly, but he failed to realize that the unassuming woman before him today was the very force controlling his company's financial destiny, wielding the power of a $5 billion investment. Calmly, Elara gathered her documents and rose. There was nothing left to say. The decision was made, and Julian Croft would learn the hardest lesson of his career. Arrogance and contempt always come with a price far greater than he ever imagined. Julian stood rooted to the spot in his private office, his eyes glued to the glowing red numbers on his computer screen. The screen's light danced across his ashen face as line after line of data updated, signaling that Apex Dynamics stock was plummeting out of control. In that moment, all of Julian's pride and habitual arrogance seemed to shatter. His phone's ringtone pierced the tense air, urgent, insistent, and cold, jerking Julian from his trance. He whirled to look at Anya, his desperation laced with fury. Anya pressed forward, striving to remain calm, though her voice trembled with worry. "Mr. Croft, we've just received urgent calls from several major shareholders. The stock has fallen 15% in under an hour, and it's still free-falling." Julian snapped around, his tone clipped and tense. "What on earth is going on, Anya? I need a clear explanation right now." Anya hesitated for a moment, eyes dropping to the datapad in her hands. She drew a deep breath before speaking in a reluctant whisper that nonetheless rang loud in Julian's mind. "It appears it all traces back to this morning's meeting, sir. Elara Vance, the woman you met earlier, is actually the CEO of Vance Capital, the investment firm overseeing more than $60 billion in assets. She's the one who directly decided on the $5 billion investment into Apex Dynamics." Her voice grew so soft, it barely qualified as a whisper. Yet each word hammered home, obliterating Julian's last illusions of control. He felt his breath catch in his throat, his cheeks burning with shame and fear. Gripping the edge of his desk for support, memories of how he'd treated Elara flooded his mind. The public derision, the refusal to shake her hand, all now crystallized into ruthless pain. Julian mumbled, dazed. "Elara Vance, Vance Capital. My God, what have I done?" Anya looked at him with pity and confusion. She'd never seen her powerful boss so vulnerable and panicked. At that moment, Julian's office door flew open, and the senior leadership team hurried in, their faces grim and bewildered. Among them, CFO Liam Bennett wasted no time in demanding an answer. "Croft, can you explain why our stock is in free fall? Shareholders are calling non-stop. This is a disaster." Julian said nothing at first. He stood motionless, then slowly turned to face Liam and the others, his eyes blazing with a mix of rage and despair. "You're the ones responsible for this mess. Why didn't any of you warn me about Alara Vance's true status? How did you let me meet with someone so powerful without full disclosure?" Liam shot back sharply. "You can't pin that on us, Julian. You're the one who underestimated people and let arrogance blind you. We warned you repeatedly about your culture of disrespect, but did you ever listen?" Another director, Daniel, jumped into the fray. "We don't have time to assign blame. We need an emergency meeting right now to figure out how to contain this crisis." Julian silently nodded, forced to admit that the situation had completely slipped beyond his control. A stark terror gripped him, his heart heavy. His entire career and reputation teetered on the brink of collapse, all because of a few arrogant missteps. Minutes later, Apex's entire senior leadership had gathered in the main boardroom. Chaos reigned. Voices rose over one another in accusations, but no one offered any viable solution. Julian sat at the head of the table, despair etched on his face as he struggled to reclaim any shred of composure. Clearing his throat, he finally spoke. "Quiet, please. What we need now is to reach out to Alara Vance and Vance Capital to explain the situation. It may not be too late to salvage this." Liam responded coldly. "You really think Ms. Vance will listen after what you did this morning? This isn't just a financial blow. It's the collapse of our company's reputation and credibility. We stand to lose that $5 billion investment and trigger a mass exodus of other investors." Julian swallowed hard, fury and desperation clashing within him. He could never have imagined himself here, betrayed by his own team, undone by the very arrogance and prejudice he'd always dismissed. As the boardroom erupted into heated debate, Julian gazed out the window, his mind empty. The crisis he faced was more than financial. It was the inevitable consequence of the contempt he'd shown others, of his disregard for basic decency, and above all, his failure to recognize the unseen power of those he deemed unworthy. Now, Julian Croft had to confront a bitter truth. He had ignited the worst crisis in the company's history by his own hand. And the most frightening realization was that the woman he had so grossly underestimated, Alara Vance, was the one truly controlling his fate. And that of Apex Dynamics. Julian was still reeling in shock and powerlessness when the ping of incoming messages snapped him back to the harsh reality. He stared at his phone screen, where a flood of alerts showed Apex Dynamics' stock continuing its steep decline. Each notification felt like another dagger to his pride, which was already crumbling. At that moment, an audio recording suddenly surfaced on major news outlets and social media. No one else but Alara Vance herself had released irrefutable evidence of that morning's meeting. In the recording, Julian's voice was unmistakable, laden with contempt and severe insults. The racially charged remarks he'd used to demean Alara now echoed in millions of ears, leaving him no avenue for denial or excuse. Stunned, Julian stared at his computer screen as the clip spread like wildfire. He realized there was nowhere left to hide. His words and actions, once cloaked by the veneer of his power, were now exposed in the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. Panicked, he grabbed his phone and tried calling Alara. He believed that a sincere apology, however belated, might still salvage something. But she didn't answer. After several attempts, he received a terse, icy reply from her. "Meet me at the office." Julian bolted from Apex's headquarters, speeding to the sleek office tower of Vance Capital. Unlike their first encounter, he entered the building now burdened by fear and uncertainty. Every glance he met brimmed with scorn and derision. Elara was waiting in the spacious, glass-walled office, which overlooked the bustling street below. When Julian stepped inside, she sat composed, arms folded, her cold gaze betraying both disappointment and anger. He approached her, bowed his head, and stammered out a contrived apology. "Ms. Vance, I truly apologize for what happened. My behavior was unacceptable, and I hope you'll give me a chance to make amends." Elara said nothing at first, watching him intently. After a heavy silence, she spoke in a steely, authoritative tone. "Mr. Croft, you needn't waste time on empty apologies. I don't care about your insincere regret. What I want to see is real change, a healthy corporate culture where everyone is treated with respect. That is your true obligation." Julian's face went pale, and he instinctively took a step back at the force of her conviction. Accustomed to wielding power over others, he now felt vulnerable and helpless in the face of his own mistakes. Elara pressed on, her voice growing stern. "I gave you a clear opportunity to demonstrate Apex's real worth, but you chose disdain and bigotry. Now you must face the consequences of your own making." Julian swallowed hard, searching for excuses, but fell silent. Deep down, he knew she was right. His arrogance and discriminatory attitude had driven the company into its gravest crisis ever. As he left the Vance Capital office, dozens of reporters surrounded him. Camera flashes stung his eyes as pointed questions rained down. "Mr. Croft, how do you respond to the newly released evidence of racism? Do you think Apex can survive this scandal? Will you resign to take responsibility for what happened?" Julian scrambled through the crowd, seeking an escape that did not exist. News of the scandal spread like wildfire. The stock plunged further, triggering a mass exodus of investors. Back at Apex's headquarters, Julian was summoned to an emergency meeting with the largest shareholders. The once grand boardroom felt icy and foreboding. Shareholders regarded him with furious disappointment. No words were needed. He understood that their trust in him was utterly shattered. Arthur Sinclair, Apex's venerable board chairman, rose and fixed Julian with a steely gaze. "Julian, you have not only gravely damaged the company's reputation, but also jeopardized the futures of thousands of employees. The board demands that you immediately present a concrete, actionable plan to resolve this crisis, or be prepared to accept the consequences of your own making." Julian bowed his head, unable to respond. For the first time in his life, he felt utterly small and powerless. Outside the window, the city pulsed on. Julian realized that what he had lost was more than money or reputation. It was the respect of those who once believed in him. He had sown the wind, and now he must face the fiercest storm of his life, a storm born of the arrogance and prejudice he so recklessly dismissed. When Julian left the boardroom, he felt with utter clarity that the nightmare he'd always feared was becoming reality. Just hours after Elara Vance had rebuffed his hollow apology, a cascade of revelations about the scandal inside Apex Dynamics went public, unleashing a tsunami of outrage that washed away every ounce of the fabricated prestige Julian had so carefully constructed. At Vance Capital's offices, Elara sat quietly before her computer screen, her expression calm yet resolute. With just a few keystrokes, she triggered the release of a meticulously prepared dossier, packed with evidence of racial discrimination, a toxic corporate culture, and abuses of power by Julian and Apex's senior executives. Those confidential files were sent directly to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the federal labor authorities, key corporate ethics watchdogs, and the firm's largest institutional investors. The moment those documents went live, markets and media alike reeled. Major investors who had once placed unwavering trust in Apex began to abandon ship. Emergency press conferences multiplied, and top financial analysts issued urgent advisories. Steer clear of Apex stock at all costs. But the crisis didn't end there. Encouraged by Ilara's boldness, former Apex employees, once silenced by intimidation, took to social media to share harrowing accounts of the toxic workplace they'd endured. They recounted instances of public humiliation at Julian's hands, and experiences of having their ideas dismissed because of race, gender, or background. Each personal testimony struck like a sharpened blade, further shredding Apex's already fragile reputation. The hashtag #ExposeApex exploded across social media platforms, drawing millions of views and intensifying public scrutiny. Journalists and major media outlets dug into Julian's past and Apex's history, unearthing still more scandals long buried. Julian felt as though the entire world had turned against him. Seated alone in his empty office, every vestige of the power and pride he once commanded had evaporated. His phone buzzed incessantly with incoming calls, but he lacked the courage to answer, aware that on the other end were only stern demands, accusations, and legal threats. Just when Julian thought things couldn't get any worse, Arthur Sinclair, Apex's venerable board chairman, appeared at his door, his face colder and more severe than ever. "Julian," Sinclair said, his voice steely and unyielding, "the board has convened an emergency session and decided to suspend you as CEO, effective immediately. We will launch an independent internal investigation to examine all allegations against you and the other senior executives." It felt like a knockout blow. Julian tried to protest, but Sinclair cut him off without mercy. "You have no voice here. You must understand that this is the consequence of your own actions. We cannot allow the company to be destroyed by one individual's recklessness and contempt." With that, Sinclair turned and left, leaving Julian frozen in despair. He realized that everything he had built now faced total collapse, and that he himself would soon have to answer to the authorities for these grave accusations. Meanwhile, Apex's independent internal inquiry kicked into high gear. Board-appointed investigators interviewed hundreds of employees and scoured thousands of messages and internal recordings. With each passing day, fresh evidence of the toxic culture Julian had fostered for years came to light. Offensive, discriminatory emails, taped meetings in which Julian blatantly dismissed ideas from women and people of color, all were laid bare under the unforgiving glare of public scrutiny. Julian recognized he had nowhere left to hide. Every one of his actions was now an open book. Ilara, from her Vance Capital office, monitored every development. She didn't celebrate Julian's downfall, but she understood it was necessary to pave the way for a fairer, healthier corporate culture. For Ilara, exposing these documents was not merely about punishing Julian. More importantly, it was a clear message to the entire business world. No one has the right to demean another's worth or abuse power to oppress and discriminate. Real change sometimes demands facing fierce resistance from entrenched actors like Julian Croft. Now Julian confronted a harsh truth. He no longer controlled the game. All the power he had once wielded had evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of public, shareholder, and legal pressure. He was finally paying the price for the arrogance and prejudice he had long dismissed. And the woman he had so publicly insulted, Elara Vance, was the one holding the final say over his fate and the future of Apex Dynamics. When the door of Elara's Vance Capital office closed behind Julian and his attorney, a profound silence settled over the spacious room. Julian had once entered here, brimming with arrogance and confidence, but today he stood as a defeated man, his face gaunt, his eyes weary and desperate. Elara sat across from him, her gaze cold and unwavering. Bathed in light from the floor-to-ceiling windows, she was more than just a powerful CEO. She embodied a revolution, an inevitable change Julian could no longer avoid. "We're here hoping to reach a reasonable solution for both sides," Julian's lawyer, Nathan Chen, began carefully, his tone polite and measured. Elara merely nodded with quiet courtesy, her composure still radiating authority. Julian drew in a deep breath, forcing his voice to remain calm. "Elara, I know you're upset about what happened, but we can negotiate a better outcome than continuing this tension." Elara tilted her head slightly, a faint, knowing smirk in her eyes. "Mr. Croft, this isn't about my personal satisfaction. What matters is whether you and Apex have the courage for true root and branch change." Julian frowned, struggling to rein in the unease stirring within him. No one had ever challenged his authority so directly. "What exactly do you mean, Elara?" he asked, his voice betraying his tension. Slowly, Elara opened a thick dossier on the table with deliberate force, then spoke each word with crystal clarity. "If Apex still wants that $5 billion investment from Vance Capital, your company must undertake sweeping reforms far beyond empty promises." Julian swallowed, eyes narrowing as he stared at the dossier. "Can you be more specific about those reforms?" Without hesitation, Elara laid out her demands, her voice resolute and uncompromising. "First, you must fully disclose your internal compensation system. All salary and benefit information for employees must be publicly transparent, eliminating any disparities based on gender, race, or any other arbitrary factor." Julian opened his mouth to protest, but Elara pressed on before he could interrupt. "Second, Apex must commit to fair and diverse hiring policies, ensuring equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of background, race, or gender. These policies will be strictly overseen by an independent body appointed by us." Julian's dissatisfaction was now evident. "Ms. Vance, aren't you overstepping into our company's internal affairs?" Elara's reply was as steady as a rock. "Mr. Croft, this is no trivial investment. We must ensure it does not enable the wrongful conduct and toxic culture you have fostered. Third, and most crucially," she continued, "Apex must agree to regular, independent evaluations conducted by a third party we select. The results of those evaluations will be made public." Julian sprang from his chair, anger boiling over. "Elara, are you really trying to strip me of control over the company I built?" Elara met his outburst with icy calm, her words precise as blades. "I am not here to destroy you or Apex. On the contrary, I'm offering a chance to salvage what remains after the havoc you've wreaked. But I will not tolerate empty promises. These changes must be concrete, irreversible, and without compromise." Julian fell silent for several heartbeats, his breath catching in his chest. Sensing the rising tension, Nathan Chen leaned forward and gently advised Julian to stay composed, then turned to Ilara. "Ms. Vance, might we adjust some of these conditions? I believe Apex may need more time to—" Ilara cut him off instantly, her voice firm and unwavering. "No, these conditions are non-negotiable. Apex must accept them in full, or forfeit the $5 billion investment forever. I doubt your board and shareholders would willingly walk away from that." Julian stared at Ilara, a mix of fury and desperation in his eyes. He understood that these terms not only threatened his personal authority, but imperiled his entire leadership position. Yet he also knew he had no real alternative. The pressure from investors, the market, and public opinion was relentless. He had to decide, even in these dire circumstances. After a tense silence, Julian exhaled in resignation and bowed his head. "All right. Apex will accept your conditions. We will implement these reforms as Vance Capital requires." Ilara nodded, her expression unmoved, as cold and resolute as ever. "I hope you understand one thing. This is only the first step. Whether these reforms succeed depends entirely on your genuine commitment. And remember, if you break your promise or try to deceive us again, the consequences will be far worse than anything you face today." Julian rose slowly and left the office, his heart heavy and his mind in turmoil. He knew this negotiation marked a pivotal turning point, not only for the company's future, but for his own as well. Ilara watched him go in silence, fully aware that the real battle was far from over. But today, she had achieved the most critical victory, forcing Julian Croft to confront the truth and accept that Apex's toxic culture could not endure for another day. The moment Julian Croft stepped out of Ilara's office, weighed down by confusion and dread, Apex Dynamics' board of directors convened an emergency meeting to make a decision that could no longer be postponed. Never had the cavernous boardroom felt so heavy. The directors' eyes were tense, unsettled, but determined. Under intense pressure from public opinion, the market, and major shareholders, they knew they had no choice but to embrace the sweeping changes Ilara had demanded. Chairman Arthur Sinclair rose, his face grave, and announced the inevitable. "We cannot deny that the company is in its gravest crisis to date. The board has unanimously decided that Julian Croft will be removed from his position as CEO, effective immediately." A charged silence fell over the room. Though members had anticipated this, Arthur's formal declaration still drove home the weight of what was about to happen. Julian sat quietly, his face ashen, struggling to hide his deep disappointment and anger. At the same time, Arthur continued, turning to the company's chief financial officer. "We are appointing Sophia Rossi, our CFO, as acting CEO to guide Apex through this crisis." Sophia Rossi, a composed, middle-aged woman with neatly styled silver hair, stood calmly. Known for her intelligence, decisiveness, and fairness, she understood that this was her opportunity to root out the toxic culture that had driven Apex to the brink. From her first day in her new role, Sophia summoned all senior leadership to an urgent meeting. Some of the more conservative directors exchanged uneasy looks, but Sophia spoke with clarity and resolve. "We must implement the extensive reforms required by Vance Capital. I will accept no reasons for delay or dissent. Anyone who feels unable to meet our new standards of transparency and diversity may depart now." Murmurs of discontent rose through the room. Daniel Edwards, a long-standing director under Julian, stood to object sharply. "Ms. Rossi, do you realize you are undermining the leadership foundation of this company? Reforms are necessary, But are these drastic measures the right solution? Sophia met his challenge without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. Precisely that so-called leadership foundation is what has driven us over the edge. Unless we discard those flawed values, this company cannot survive. Sophia then launched a series of decisive reforms. She ordered full disclosure of every employee's compensation, dismantling the inequalities that had festered for years. Simultaneously, she terminated several entrenched conservative directors known for their discriminatory attitudes, individuals who had held influential positions for far too long. Each dismissal sparked intense debate, both inside and outside the company. Some argued Sophia was moving too hastily, adding chaos to an already turbulent period, but she remained unshaken, knowing these bold steps were essential to restore trust among employees and investors. Over the following days, Sophia personally oversaw the creation of an independent diversity and equity oversight committee, rolling out objective, transparent hiring standards. A third-party organization nominated by Vance Capital was swiftly established to conduct rigorous, periodic assessments of Apex's work environment and corporate culture. At first, many employees and mid-level managers doubted the effectiveness of these changes, yet within weeks they began to see Sophia's genuine commitment. Gradually, faith was rebuilt, and hope kindled among those who had long endured bias and pressure. In the financial markets, Apex's stock initially swung wildly in response to Sophia's sweeping actions, but investors soon recognized the company's genuine pivot toward positive change. Financial analysts shifted from issuing sell-off warnings to advising a close watch on Apex's restructuring progress. From her Vance Capital office, Elara Vance monitored every development with cautious satisfaction. She understood the challenges Sophia faced, and it reinforced her confidence that the $5 billion investment she was considering could indeed catalyze a profound turnaround. Meanwhile, Julian sat in his luxurious yet lonely apartment, following the news of Apex's transformation. He bitterly realized the company was beginning to revive without him under Sophia's decisive leadership. Each new policy and reform served as a painful reminder. His downfall was not the result of a single, careless decision, but the inevitable outcome of a toxic culture he had built and maintained for years. Sophia Rossi knew the road ahead still held many challenges, but she believed deeply in the power of transparency and equity. She was determined to spark a true cultural revolution, one that would leave an indelible mark on Apex's history. The moment the door of Elara's Vance Capital office closed behind Julian and his attorney, a profound silence fell over the expansive room. Julian had once entered here brimming with arrogance and confidence, but today he looked like a defeated man, haggard, exhausted, and desperate. Elara sat across from him, her gaze cold and unwavering. In the bright light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she was more than a powerful CEO. She embodied a revolution, a change Julian could no longer evade. "We're here, hoping to reach a reasonable solution for both parties," Julian's lawyer, Nathan Chen, began, his voice careful and polite. Elara simply nodded, maintaining her calm, authoritative demeanor. Julian drew a deep breath and forced his voice to remain steady. "Elara, I know you're unhappy with what happened, but surely we can work out something better than this standoff." Elara tilted her head slightly, a hint of wry amusement in her eyes. "Mr. Croft, this isn't about my personal satisfaction. What concerns me is whether you and Apex have the courage for fundamental, root-and-branch change." Julian frowned, struggling to hide the discomfort rising within him. No one had ever challenged his authority so directly. What exactly do you mean, Elara? He asked, tension edging his voice. Slowly, Elara opened a thick dossier on the table with deliberate force and spoke each word with steely clarity. If Apex still wants that $5 billion investment from Vance Capital, your company must undertake sweeping reforms far beyond empty promises. Julian swallowed and looked down at the dossier, skeptical. Can you specify what reforms you have in mind? Without hesitation, Elara laid out her demands in firm, uncompromising tones. First, you must fully disclose your entire compensation system. All salary and benefit information for every employee must be publicly transparent to eliminate any disparities based on gender, race, or any other arbitrary factor. Julian began to protest, but Elara cut him off immediately. Second, Apex must commit to fair and diverse hiring policies, ensuring equal opportunity for all, regardless of background, race, or gender. These policies will be rigorously overseen by an independent body appointed by us. Julian's impatience became evident. Vance, aren't you overstepping into our company's internal affairs? Elara replied evenly, without a flicker of doubt. Mr. Croft, this $5 billion investment is no game. We need to ensure it doesn't prop up the misconduct and toxic culture you fostered. Third, and most critically, she continued, Apex must agree to regular, independent audits by a third party we select. The results of those audits will be published publicly. Julian leapt to his feet, fury in his voice. Elara, are you really trying to strip me of control over the company I built? Elara remained seated, her tone razor-sharp. I have no desire to destroy you or Apex. I'm trying to help you salvage what's left after the havoc you've caused. But I will not accept empty pledges. These reforms must be concrete, specific, and irreversible. Julian fell silent for a few heartbeats, a catch in his throat. Sensing the tension, Nathan Chen quietly urged him to stay calm, then addressed Elara. Miss Vance, might we adjust some of these conditions? Apex may need more time to… Elara cut him off instantly, her voice unwavering. No, these conditions are non-negotiable. Apex must accept them in full, or lose the $5 billion investment forever. I doubt your board and shareholders would willingly walk away from that. Julian stared at her, a mixture of anger and desperation in his eyes. He knew these demands threatened not only his personal authority, but also his future leadership. Yet he also realized he had no other option. Pressure from investors, the market, and public opinion left him no choice but to decide, even under the worst circumstances. After a tense pause, Julian exhaled in resignation and bowed his head. All right, Apex will accept your conditions. We will implement these reforms as Vance Capital requires. Elara nodded, her expression unchanged, still cold and resolute. I hope you understand this is only the first step. Whether these reforms succeed depends on your genuine commitment. And remember, if you break your promise or try to deceive us again, the consequences will be far more severe than anything you face today. Julian rose slowly and left the office, his heart heavy and his mind in turmoil. He understood that this negotiation marked a pivotal turning point, not only for the company's future, but for his own. Elara watched him depart in silence, fully aware that the real battle was far from over. But today, she had achieved the most critical victory, forcing Julian Croft to confront the truth and accept that the toxic culture he had created could not survive another day. In the wake of that landmark agreement, the atmosphere at Apex Dynamics underwent a complete transformation. The months of tension, conflict, and uncertainty gave way to a new spirit of hope, confidence, and positive energy under Sophia Rossi's decisive leadership. Sophia recognized that her mission extended far beyond mere crisis management. She was tasked with rebuilding the company's culture from the ground up, ensuring that the grievous mistakes of the past could never be repeated. With unwavering determination, she championed sweeping reforms, from a fair, transparent hiring system to robust diversity and inclusion policies. Where Apex's culture had once been known for its authoritarianism and bias, it became open and transparent. Every week, Sophia held town hall meetings to solicit employee feedback, cultivating a workplace where everyone felt heard and respected. Those who had once remained silent out of fear now felt empowered to share ideas and innovations without dread of punishment or contempt. Sophia also partnered closely with independent organizations to conduct regular cultural audits. The reports from these audits were published publicly, earning renewed trust from investors and the market. Under this rigorous oversight, Apex's reputation gradually recovered, and it emerged as a new emblem of positive change in an industry long criticized for conservatism and unfair practices. Against this backdrop of revitalization, Elara Vance, who had been closely monitoring every development, arranged a formal meeting with Sophia to discuss the future of Vance Capital's contemplated $5 billion investment. They met at Apex's headquarters in a bright, welcoming conference room that reflected the company's renewed ethos. When Elara entered, she immediately sensed the difference. The coldness and prejudice she'd once encountered were gone, replaced by friendly smiles and warm greetings, tangible proof of Sophia's hard work. Sophia rose to welcome her, offering a genuine, warm smile. "Welcome back, Ms. Vance. I hope you can see the remarkable changes we've made at Apex." Elara returned the smile, her eyes reflecting genuine satisfaction. "I've been watching your reforms closely, Sophia. Honestly, you've exceeded my highest expectations." Their conversation was candid and open. Sophia detailed the reform's successes, impressive statistics on the increased representation of women and people of color in senior roles, full transparency in compensation, and programs that made employees feel valued and heard. After listening attentively, Elara nodded and delivered the announcement everyone had been awaiting. "Sophia, I am pleased to confirm that Vance Capital will proceed with the full $5 billion investment in Apex. I believe this is not only a sound business decision, but also a strong vote of confidence in the new corporate culture you and your team are building." News of the $5 billion investment spread quickly, sparking an immediate positive reaction in the market. Apex's stock climbed steadily as investor confidence was restored. Financial analysts began to cite Apex as a model for corporate governance, transparency, and inclusive culture. Under Sophia's leadership, Apex didn't just recover, it became an industry pioneer. Other major tech firms followed suit, restructuring their own internal systems, removing entrenched negativism, adopting fair hiring practices, and commissioning independent cultural audits. Once mired in scandal and crisis, Apex experienced a remarkable rebirth thanks to Sophia's bold vision and Elara Vance's strategic backing. Former skeptics within the company now took pride in being part of this powerful transformation. And Julian Croft, the man who once wielded supreme authority at Apex, could only observe these triumphs from afar, consumed by deep regret. He realized that the power he had coveted was ultimately illusory. True power lay in the respect, fairness, and transparency that Sophia and Ilara had tirelessly championed. Apex's revival marked more than a business success. It was a historic turning point in how companies perceived the essential role of diversity and equity. Through her decisive investment, Ilara Vance sent a resounding message. Equality, respect, and inclusion are not mere ideals, but vital prerequisites for any organization's enduring success in today's world. The spectacular success of Apex's deep-seated reforms quickly rippled through the tech industry and financial world, proving the real power of a transparent, diverse corporate culture. Ilara Vance recognized that Apex's dramatic turnaround wasn't just a one-company story. It was a rare opportunity to spark positive, lasting change across the entire investment landscape. Determined to seize this moment, Ilara took center stage at a major New York event attended by the world's top financial leaders. Confident and compelling, she unveiled Vance Capital's new investment criteria. From now on, any company seeking their funding must meet rigorous standards of equality, diversity, and transparency in governance and culture. The room fell silent as Ilara declared, "Going forward, Vance Capital will evaluate companies not only on profits and growth potential, but also on leadership ethics, corporate culture, and genuine commitment to diversity and inclusion. This isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only way to secure sustainable value for investors and society alike." Her bold statement shook the global finance community. Companies that wanted Vance Capital's backing scrambled to overhaul their governance, revamp hiring policies, and reshape corporate culture. Within weeks, dozens of major firms voluntarily adopted the standards Ilara had announced, setting off an unprecedented wave of reform. Across financial forums and social media, debates raged over corporate responsibility and the role of major investors. Seeing the mounting pressure, other leading investment houses began instituting similar criteria, retooling their partner selection and portfolio management to align with these new norms. But Ilara knew that changing corporate behavior required more than just standards and speeches. She aimed to drive real, internal change by empowering a new generation of leaders from historically overlooked communities. With that goal, Vance Capital launched a special investment and OISENT training program for emerging leaders from underrepresented groups, people of color, women, and immigrants. The initiative provided not only capital, but also intensive leadership and governance training, equipping them with the confidence and skills to transform their own companies and communities. These rising leaders soon made their mark, delivering strong business results while exemplifying diversity and fairness in the boardroom. Ilara stood beside them as a hands-on mentor, offering practical advice and a sympathetic ear whenever they faced challenges. In a Forbes interview, Ilara stated firmly, "True investment power isn't about short-term gains. It's about shaping society and opening real opportunities for everyone. Responsible investing isn't a passing trend. It's a long-term commitment that every major investor must embrace." From afar, Julian Croft, the once all-powerful CEO who lost everything to his arrogance and prejudice, watched Ilara's rise with growing awe. He realized she had achieved what he never dared to imagine, transforming the business world through economic influence and genuine social responsibility. Meanwhile, under Ilara's ongoing support, Sophia Rossi and Apex flourished. The company became a new standard for success, rooted in ethical values and social responsibility. Apex's full recovery and its inspiring example encouraged other firms to believe that financial performance and social good could truly go hand in hand. Years later, standing on a stage to accept a prestigious award for excellence in socially responsible investing, Elara addressed thousands with passion and pride. We each choose the legacy we leave behind. I choose one of equality, diversity, and transparency. I choose to invest in people, in the young leaders changing society every day by giving them real power, voice, and opportunity. The audience erupted in applause, but Elara knew her journey wasn't over. She vowed to continue standing with the next generation of leaders, supporting them with all her financial resources and experience, because only when economic power is used wisely can the world truly change. Elara Vance's story and the revolution at Apex became a classic lesson for investors and businesses everywhere. It demonstrated not just the transformative power of one individual, but also that integrity, transparency, and diversity aren't mere ideals. They are the strongest foundation for lasting success. And that is the legacy Elara Vance is proud to leave. A legacy far beyond the numbers. A clear message: the true power is not in oppressing others, but in creating positive, enduring change for all.